members of our cabinet, members of Congress, community leaders, law enforcement officials. It's good to be here with all of you. Not under these circumstances, but it is good to be with you. And I know, of course, that today, following yesterday, that all of our hearts, of course, are with the people of Uvalde, Texas, with the parents, with the children, with all the folks who said goodbye yesterday morning to someone they loved, not knowing that that goodbye would be their last. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. As the President said last night, we must have the courage to stand up to the gun lobby and pass reasonable gun safety laws. We must work together to create an America where everyone feels safe in their community, where children feel safe in their schools. And of course, that responsibility that we collectively have to ensure that all people feel safe in their community is what brings us together today. It is an honor to be joined by the families of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others. And I've met many of you before, and many times. And many others I'm meeting for the first time. I am moved, as always, by your courage. You have felt so much pain, and you have endured unimaginable grief. You have experienced the anguish of losing someone you love and cherish. And yet, you are here, as you have been throughout the days of your grief, standing selflessly, full of grace and resilience, to speak up, to speak out, often against odds, great odds, to fight for a world where no one has to experience what you have been through. Your loved ones should be with us today. You should not have to mourn. You should never have had to mourn in order for our nation to feel your pain and to understand what is wrong and to agree that something must be done. I know it is a particularly difficult day for the Floyd family. 2 years ago today, a brother, a son, a father was taken from you. We will never forget what happened that day. The eyes of the world, literally, were on what happened that day. And collectively, we remain horrified by what we witnessed. And we are here today in memory of George Floyd and all those we have lost to take action. The law enforcement office of our nation, well, they swear an oath to protect and to serve. And the vast majority do so honorably. Yet we know, too often, when there is a use of biased policing and excessive force, when that occurs, it too often is not met with accountability. Denying equal justice, not just to individuals, but to whole communities, and therefore to our nation as a whole. Trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve is critical to ensuring public safety. And as many of you know, this is an issue I have worked on personally since my first days as an elected district attorney and as California's Attorney General. As a United States Senator, I, together with Senator Cory Book, Congresswoman Karen Bass, introduced legislation to advance much-needed reforms. That legislation would have ensured greater transparency and increased accountability. We later named it the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And it was passed because of the strength of the leadership in the House of Representatives through the House of Representatives. However, last fall, Senate Republicans rejected the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. They walked away from their moral obligation to address what caused millions of Americans to march in the streets. The critical need that a coalition of Americans were demanding, were pleading for in terms of reform and accountability. At the time, President Joe Biden and I, and all of us here, we made clear, and we vowed that we would explore every action available to us at the executive level to advance the cause of justice in our nation. In a moment, our president will sign an executive order that takes dozens of important actions to advance effective, accountable policing, to strengthen trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve, and to help us fight crime and promote public safety. This order will help protect our communities, and it will help keep members of law enforcement safe on the job. These actions are a result of input and collaboration from a broad set of partners, many of whom are here today, civil rights leaders, members of Congress, in particular members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I see Madam Chair here with us today, leading law enforcement groups, and of course the families of the victims. We know this executive order will not take away your pain, and the pain of all those families who may not be in this room right now. We also know this executive order is no substitute for legislation, nor does it accomplish everything we know must be done. But it is a necessary and long overdue critical step forward. And once again, the President and I call on the United States Senate to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And once again, we vow that we will do everything in our power to protect public safety, to support law enforcement, and to address this issue of racial injustice wherever it exists. And with that, it is now my great honor to introduce a man who, when he ran for president, was clear in his purpose, which was to bring our nation together, who fights every day to make sure all our communities are safe and that the rights of all people are protected. The President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Thank you all. Vice President Harris, before we begin, let me say a few words about what happened in Uvalde, Texas, elementary school. Since I spoke last night, the confirmed death toll has tragically climbed, including another teacher and three more students. Jill and I will be traveling to Texas in the coming days to meet with the families and let them know we have a sense of their pain, and hopefully bring some little comfort to the community in shock, in grief, and in trauma. As a nation, I think we all must be there for them, everyone. And we must ask, when in God's name will we do what needs to be done to, if not completely stop, fundamentally change the amount of the carnage that goes on in this country? To state the obvious, like Corey and a lot of other people here, I'm sick and tired. I'm just sick and tired of what's going on and continues to go on. I spent my career as chairman of the Judiciary Committee and as vice president working for common sense gun reforms. As I said, as a senator and a vice president. While they clearly will not prevent every tragedy, we know certain ones will have significant impact and have no negative impact on the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment's not absolute. When it was passed, you couldn't own a Texas elementary school. Since I spoke last night, the confirmed death toll has tragically climbed, including another teacher and three more students. Jill and I will be traveling to Texas in the coming days to meet with the families and let them know we have a sense, just a sense of their pain, and hopefully bring some little comfort to the community in shock, in grief, and in trauma. As a nation, I think we all must be there for them, everyone. And we must ask, when in God's name will we do what needs to be done to, if not completely stop, fundamentally change the amount of the carnage that goes on in this country? To state the obvious, like Corey and a lot of other people here, I'm sick and tired. I'm just sick and tired of what's going on and continues to go on. I spent my career as chairman of the Judiciary Committee and as vice president working for common sense gun reforms. As I said, as a senator and a vice president. While they clearly will not prevent every tragedy, we know certain ones will have significant impact and have no negative impact on the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment's not absolute. When it was passed, you couldn't own a cannon. You couldn't own certain kinds of weapons. It's just always been limitations. But guess what? These actions we've taken before, they saved lives, and they can do it again. The idea that an 18-year-old can walk into a store and buy weapons of war designed and marketed to kill is, I think, just wrong. It just violates common sense. Even the manufacturer, the inventor of that weapon, thought that as well. You know, where's the backbone? Where's the courage to stand up to a very powerful lobby? But here's one modest step. The federal agency that measures and ensures that gun laws are enforced and the Second Amendment is abided by, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Explosives, the AFT, has not had a Senate confirmation leader for 7 years because of these disputes. For 7 years, been out without anyone in charge. I nominated a supremely qualified former prosecutor who has broad bipartisan support from law enforcement and the community overall. His hearing was held earlier today, I should say. The Senate should confirm and without delay, without excuse, send the nomination to my desk. It's time for action. We're here today for the same purpose, to come together and say enough, to act. We must. Vice President Harris and members of the cabinet, members of the Congress, civil rights leaders, law enforcement officers and officials, distinguished guests, especially the families missing a piece of their soul, including the family sitting in front of me and the beautiful young girl who told me my daddy's going to change history. And he will, honey. He will. They've lost a piece of their soul 2 years ago as well. You know, I know events, remember your loved ones.
President Biden speaking at an event in Washington, D.C., once again expressing his outrage over the shooting that occurred here in Texas, the school behind me. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Kristen Welker joins me now. Kristen, the president is laying it all out there.
He certainly is, Lester. We are hearing from an impassioned President Biden yet again, echoing some of that same anger that we heard when he first spoke here at the White House overnight, saying that he is sick and tired of these types of mass shooting and calling on lawmakers to act. It is notable that he said an 18-year-old should not be able to go into a store and buy a long gun. We know that lawmakers are starting to talk about what, if anything, they can do to take action. There is still a lot of division on Capitol Hill about how to address this between Democrats and Republicans. They have tried and failed to pass measures that would restrict gun access over the years, but frankly, all of their attempts have failed. So the question is this moment different? Again, we know that some lawmakers are calling to increase the age to be able to purchase a long gun. Will that happen this time? Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer essentially saying earlier today that he wants to give time for his fellow lawmakers to try to strike a deal, try to find some common ground on this incredibly difficult issue, but acknowledging that right now no vote is imminent. So I anticipate we are going to hear more anger from this president and for those who are calling for some type of change, Lester.
All right, Kristen, thank you. Joining me now is senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Hake, also here in Uvalde. Kristen laid out the question, will this time be different? What are you hearing from Capitol Hill?
Well, Lester, the president really only alluded to the idea of raising the age to buy certain weapons. Beyond that, the only specific action he called on Congress to do is to confirm an ATF director. That has not been done since 2015. But his party wants more. They want gun control actions. And on that issue, that's been really something where the Senate has never failed to fail, whether it be after Sandy Hook or Parkland or any other mass shootings. There's been much discussion, but little action. Now, the House has passed a big background check bill that would tighten background checks for firearm purchases nationwide. Months of negotiation late last year failed to generate the necessary Republican support for that bill. But back on Capitol Hill today, lawmakers have been telling our team that perhaps the area where there might be some opportunity for bipartisanship is on red flag laws, those extreme risk protection orders that might allow a judge, in many cases, in concert with a medical professional, to have individuals' guns ordered to be taken away from them. The reason for optimism on this issue is that there are some Republican-controlled states like Florida and Indiana that have passed measures like that. It's not everything that Democrats want. In fact, it's not even most of it, but it is perhaps the area where there could be some bipartisan cooperation. Chris Murphy, the Democratic senator from Connecticut, largely heading up negotiations from the Democratic side. John Cornyn, the senior senator from Texas, who was here in Uvalde today, returning to D.C., the key figure to watch on the Republican side if any of those negotiations might turn into anything substantial. Lester.
All right, Garrett, thank you for that. My colleague, senior national correspondent Tom Llamas is with me. Tom, you've been doing some interviews that are giving us really a clearer idea of who this shooter was.
Yeah, we're learning more about the shooter and more about his timeline as well. According to the mother's boyfriend of the shooter, he was living with the mother and the boyfriend, but 2 months ago they had a big blow-up fight. The shooter was upset that the Wi-Fi was being turned off, so that's when he goes and moves in with the grandparents. And then last week, everything changed for some reason. He turns 18. In a span of 4 days, our investigative team has learned he purchased 2 AR-15 style rifles and 375 rounds of ammunition. That takes us to just yesterday when he shoots his grandmother in the face and then comes here and starts the carnage. I had a chance today to speak with his aunt, who says they are not sure why he did this. The boyfriend of the mother says that the kid clearly had problems. He was a loner. He didn't like to converse. He had some problems with the mother. And then the aunt tells me that they are incredibly sad about this. They're worried about the grandmother, who is going through several surgeries right now. I asked if he was depressed. She said, I don't want to talk about that. I asked, why did he flip? Why did he target this elementary school? She says she doesn't know. Lester, today we've learned the how. The gunman is dead. I'm not sure if we're ever going to learn the why.
All right, Tom, you'll have much more of that tonight on Nightly News. Thank you for that. That concludes this NBC News special report. I'll have much more this evening in a special hour-long edition of Nightly News. For now, I'm Lester Holt in Uvalde, Texas. Good day.
stepped up and endorsed what we're talking about today. As divided as this nation can feel, today we're showing the strength of our unity. It matters. This executive order is going to deliver the most significant police reform in decades. It applies directly under law to only 100,000 federal law enforcement officers, all the federal law enforcement officers. And though federal incentives and best practices that are attached to it, we expect the order to have significant impact on state and local law enforcement agencies as well. Here are the key parts. First, the executive order promotes accountability. It creates a new national law enforcement accountability database to track records of misconduct so that an officer can't hide the misconduct. It strengthens the pattern and practice investigations to address systematic misconduct in some departments. It mandates all federal agents wear and activate body cameras while on patrol. Second, the executive order raises standards, bans chokeholds, restricts no-knock warrants, tightens use of force policies to emphasize de-escalation and duty to intervene to stop another officer from using executive force, just as occurred. It didn't occur, but people testified it didn't occur in George Floyd's case. And third, the executive order modernizes policing. It calls for a fresh approach to recruit, train, promote, and retrain law enforcement that tied to advancing public safety and public trust. Right now, we don't systematically collect data, for instance, on instances of police use of force. This executive order is going to improve that data collection. There's a lot more as well. The bottom line of the executive order includes reforms that have long been talked about or are finally implemented at a federal level. And it comes at a critical time. By building trust, we can strengthen public safety, and we can more effectively fight crime in our communities. And we can do one more thing. We can show what's possible when we work together. Look, I know progress can be slow and frustrating. And there is a concern that the reckoning on race inspired 2 years ago is beginning to fade. But acting today, we're showing that our dear friend, the late John Lewis, congressman, wrote in his final words after his final march for justice in July of 2020, he said, "Democracy is not a state, it is an act. Democracy is not a state, it's an act, an affirmative act." And today we're acting. We're showing that speaking out matters, being engaged matters, and that the work of our time, healing the soul of this nation, is ongoing and unfinished and requires all of us never to give up, always to keep the faith. I close with this. Over 2 years now, for over 2 years, we've gotten to know one another and pray with one another, not figuratively, literally. I promised the Floyd family, among others, George's name is not just going to be a hashtag. Your daddy's name is going to be known for a long time. That as a nation, we're going to ensure his legacy and the legacy of so many others remembered today. It's not about their death, but what we do in their memory that matters. The purpose. In just a few moments, I'm going to deliver on that promise when I sign the executive order. And Kamala and I will continue, along with our friends in Congress, to get meaningful police reform legislation to my desk as best we can, as quickly as we can, beyond what we're doing here, affecting states as well, directly. On this day, we're showing the America we know we're a great nation, because the vast majority of us are good people. And there's nothing beyond our capacity, nothing, when we act together as the United States of America. This is a start, a new start. May God bless you all. May God protect our forces. And now I'm going to go sign that executive order. Thank you. I'm about to sign Advancing Executive Accountable Policing and Criminal Justice Practices to Enhance Public Trust and Public Safety. And since I only have one pen, you're all going to get a copy of this. I don't have to do one stroke at a time with each pen. God willing, thank you. Come around. Come on.
Come on, baby. Come on.
Father's going to change the world.
You're getting so big.
The last time I saw you, I'm looking here.
You okay, Asia? I'll be darned. Now she told me when I saw her, she was a little girl 2 years ago. Seriously, she pulled me aside and she said, "My daddy changed the world."